Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lydia French. I hope you all are doing well. I want to welcome you to our October Teaching and Learning for Student Success monthly webinar series. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce Dr. Amaury Nora of UT San Antonio. Dr. Nora is Professor of Higher Education, Co-Director of the Center for Research and Policy in Education, and Associate Dean for Research in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He is also editor of the Review of Higher Education, the journal for the Association for the Study of Higher Ed, or ASH. Dr. Nora was inducted into the class of 2009 as an AERA Fellow for his scholarship in the field of higher education. His research has focused on theoretical perspectives related to student persistence, the role of college on diverse student populations across different types of institutions, and the development of retention models that integrate economic theories and psychosocial perspectives within college persistence frameworks. Dr. Nora has served on the editorial boards of Research in Higher Education, the Review of Higher Education, the Journal of Higher Education, Journal of Hispanic Higher Education, and the Journal of College Student Retention, Research and Theory. Among a variety of additional appointments, fellowships, and consultancies on the state and federal level since at least 1994, Dr. Nora is currently a member of a technical review panel for the U.S. Department of Education, the National Center for Education Statistics, and the National Science Foundation, focused on the National Educational Longitudinal Study from 2000 to 2012. And so I will now turn it over to Dr.
Am I ready to
Nora.
begin?
Absolutely, go right ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of new to this webinar, so please excuse me. Hi, everyone. I was asked to speak on two different topics this afternoon. The first one was who has been sort of influential in my career, and the second one is on an article that a co-author and I did on the role of perceptions of prejudice and discrimination, which we will get to a little bit later on. But let me go ahead and get started on the first part, which I've sort of titled The Influential Others in My Career. Okay, there we go. Okay. Right after I was promoted to full professor, I was asked to write a chapter in a book edited by Millie Garcia that was titled Balancing Research, Teaching, and Service, a Mentoring Perspective. In that chapter on mentoring, I wrote about three mentors and a friend that have been very influential in my life. I believe that I've been granted the opportunity to have three very special mentoring experiences in my professional life. Those who I truly consider mentors in my career have served as such at different yet overlapping times. I believe that mentoring has many faces or functions. One mentor has been there from the beginning of my professional career and has remained special to this day. Another entered my life at the time some very important decisions regarding my career were being made. He too has remained a special friend to this day. My last mentor is someone that for many years I have regarded as my true friend and came to realize that she has served as my spiritual mentor. All three have been and will forever remain my professional soulmates. Let me start with my first mentor, Michael Olivas, as you've seen on the screen. It is difficult to define what anyone means by mentoring. However, as I look back over my academic career, I lose count of the numerous times that he has influenced this aspect of my life. How would I define mentoring or influential? Well, it was the time he offered me 2 consecutive postdoctoral fellowships with his institute so that I could further my research and publications. It was the time he spoke with the search committee for my first academic appointment. The time he introduced me to someone with the same research interest that I had. The time he nominated me for my first research award, the time he asked me to be a co-principal investigator on one of his grants, the time he got me involved with people in Washington, D.C. in education testing service, the time he spoke to someone about me serving as co-chair for a research paper proposals in a major professional organization, and most of all, the time he stood up at one of my presentations and declared that my work was as informative as that of Pasquarella, Terenzini, and Tinto. That I will always remember. Even now, as a full professor, I find myself asking him for advice or receiving a phone call or email message about how I should consider this or that. The only thing that Michael has ever asked of me is that I do the right thing, the same thing for someone else. That promise to me has influenced how I teach both in the classroom and outside of class, how I advise my graduate students, and how I work with other faculty. My second mentor and dear friend has been John Smart. John was a mentor in my life at a point in my career where tenure and promotion were controlling my life. As an assistant professor at a research university, I wasn't sure what it would take to one day become a tenure professor without being sidetracked by other aspects of the professoriate. Balancing research, teaching, and service as an assistant professor, as you all know, is exceedingly difficult. I can truly say that John took me under his wing as the chair of our department and a friend, and protected my time devoted for publishing by minimizing the number of committees that I served on and talking to me about my teaching and my responsibilities as a member of the college and department. There were times when I would be called into his office and be told that it was time now to assume more departmental responsibilities so that when my tenure review came up, I would be prepared. The most significant aspect of his mentorship has been his kindness, his warmth, and his caring nature. John was not only there to support my approach when other faculty from different departments differed on what I was teaching in my class, but when I needed a friend to talk about the death of a parent. When I was offered a position at another university and he said that I owed it to myself and to my family to consider it. However, when he fought so hard to have the dean match the offer so that I would not go, and when I was asked to prepare my papers for tenure, I am not sure how successful I would have been in my early review for promotion to full professor had it not been for the preparation and research, teaching, and service that John oversaw. His stern and well thought out suggestions for my tenure package, and above all, his friendship throughout the whole process has always been special for me. My third mentor has been more spiritual in nature, and that is Laura Rendon. While we all strive to balance research, teaching, and service in our academic careers, there are times when some of us become obsessed with research and publishing, many times for its own sake. It was Laura who has always been there to constantly remind me that it must all mean something to someone. I know of no other person who possesses the passion that she does in linking research to service. Her view on service is that if we cannot truly make a difference in a student's life, it is not worth all of the statistically significant parameters that we can derive. Her empathy and caring has always influenced my research, my teaching, and my outreach to the community. Her get to the point approach and her how does this tie to the real world approach are forever etched in my mind. But this is not the full nor even the most important contribution that Laura has made in my professional career. When I first noted that Laura was my spiritual mentor, I had much more in mind. Laura was there at a point in my career when I wondered if it was worth staying in academia, whether or not what I was doing meant anything, and if what I was doing was making me happy. The comfort and support I found in her words also made me realize that there is a link between one's fulfillment, contentment, and happiness in our engagement in our research, our teaching, and in what we give back to the community. And now I come to that fourth individual in my life, Alberto Cabrera. I can truly say that our relationship was a mentoring one per se, although I believe that we have both learned much from each other over the years. The best thing that I could have happened to my research has been our collaboration, our combined efforts at having efforts at making a significant contribution to the field and his deep and theoretically sound perspectives. I believe that establishing a specific line of inquiry can be made with another researcher and that these collaborative efforts may also ease the tenure process. Albert's and my perspective on working together has been one that once established through single author publications, it would be foolish to not work together with another colleague. Such collaboration would not only add to our productivity, but we will ensure that we would not duplicate our research efforts by working independently. My intent this afternoon is to emphasize the importance of mentoring in the whole process, from graduate school to promotion to full professor. My desire is that those starting out in academia will seek out mentors who can play a significant part in their careers, and for those who have already been fortunate enough to be fully established in their profession, to provide the means to ease the process. I have been very fortunate to have found my three friends and my three mentors and a friend. And now I'm going to turn to the second part of my presentation, uh, which I thought they were very different, but still, I thought I can do both. And so I'm switching a little bit now. The rest of the second part then focuses on the article that's titled "The Role of Perceptions of Prejudice and Discrimination on the Adjustment of Minority Students to College." Now, this study was a comparison between minorities and non-minorities on a hypothesized student persistence model. Within that model, we went ahead and focused on 7 intermediate and final outcomes, which, as you can see, are listed. Those included the academic experiences with faculty and academic staff, students' social integration, their academic and intellectual development, their academic performance, their goal commitment, their institutional commitment, and yes, as the last outcome, persistence. The focus of the study was based on assertions that had been made related to minority students. And so we were looking basically overall in terms of what was the role of perceptions of prejudice on the adjustment to college environments and on college-related outcomes. So there were 4 assertions that we were trying to address. One was that these perceptions of prejudice are present only among minority students. Second, that the exposure to a climate of prejudice and discrimination has the effect of lessening their adjustment to the academic and social domains of the institution, and that a climate of racism and prejudice harms the cognitive and affective development of minority students. And then, of course, lastly, that these perceptions of prejudice and discrimination overshadow the role of cognitive factors, for example, the academic ability, in affecting minority students' decisions to college. Now, let me start off, though, first with, again, we're looking at these perceptions of prejudice and discrimination. But what do we mean by those? Well, we looked at that, and it was a latent variable that was sort of highly made up of 3 multiple indicators, and they were all highly interrelated. So we're looking at using these 3 to measure one big major construct that we label perceptions of prejudice and discrimination. And one of the first indicators was the campus climate. This campus climate then was composed of 4 different items. The first one was whether the students witnessed the use of discriminatory gestures or words directed toward minorities, whether they felt that there was a general atmosphere of prejudice on campus, whether they encountered racism while attending the institution. Now, in this one, in encountering racism, it wasn't necessarily that there might have been the targets, but that, well, they could have been, but they might have also have just seen it on other students. And then the last item was whether they had heard negative words towards people of his or her own race. The second multiple indicator is the perceptions of discriminatory attitudes. And this variable measures the extent to which the student perceived that faculty and academic staff harbored feelings of prejudice towards minorities on that campus. The third indicator then is what we called or labeled in-class discriminatory experiences, and that sort of provided a measure of the extent to which the student felt that he or she had been singled out in class and treated differently than other students. So now, coming back then, we'll start looking in terms of whether these perceptions, the impact that these perceptions of prejudice and discrimination had on that first intermediate variable, which is the academic experiences with faculty and academic staff. Now, while we were doing a comparison between minorities and non-minorities, for purposes of today's presentation, I decided to only focus on minority students. The article is there if you want to read it, but I thought it would just, for the sake of time, I would just limit to what we found with regarding minorities. In terms of what impacted the academic experiences with faculty and academic staff, we found that there were 2 very important variables. The first one was the parental encouragement. I'm not really going to talk about that, but I can say that it was a positive impact that it had, and it'll come out a little bit later on into how it sort of negated some of the negative ones, such as the second one that was brought on by this perceptions of prejudice and discrimination. So again, what we're looking at is what did we find with regard as to what impact those perceptions had on the academic experience as well. Minority students who perceived higher levels of discrimination in the classroom as well as on campus were also less likely to have these positive experiences with faculty and academic staff. Okay, we move on now to the next one. We're again looking again at the perceptions of prejudice and discrimination on social integration. For minorities then, we notice that these perceptions of discrimination in the classroom and on campus were found to have a negative impact on the students' social experiences on their campuses. Those students that perceived higher levels of prejudice and discrimination were less likely to engage in social and extracurricular activities on their campus. And examples of those included in terms of peer interactions that they had. It also included such things as not actively being engaged in several student organizations. Okay, I'll move on now to the next one, which is the impact that those perceptions had on academic and intellectual development. Again, for minorities, Latino and African American students who perceived higher levels of discrimination on their campus and in the classroom were less likely to experience reported gains in academic and intellectual development. Now, I've included the three items that provided a measure of that construct, academic and intellectual development. And so in this case then, in terms of what we found, was that those who experienced more perceptions of discrimination, they were not satisfied with his or her intellectual development. They did not feel that the academic experiences had a positive influence on his or her intellectual growth, and they were not satisfied with his or her academic experiences at the institution. Okay, I'll move on now in terms of the impact that it had on academic performance. And in this case, we defined academic performance by operationally defining it as the grade point average. For minorities, we found that perceptions of prejudice and discrimination were found not to have any direct effects on GPA. Now, I have to clarify this. What we found was that it was not directly influencing. However, this factor was found to manifest its influence, its negative influence, through the other intermediate outcomes, through their academic experiences, their social integration, and their academic and intellectual development that we've talked about. So while these perceptions did not directly impact on GPA, they were felt in terms of the influence that these perceptions had on all of the other intermediate variables. Okay, then I move on to the impact that they had on goal commitment. Now, this one came as a surprise to us, okay? And we found that these perceptions of prejudice and discrimination were found to exert no direct, no indirect, or no total effects on goal commitment. That even though these negative perceptions influenced other factors in the model, they did not diminish the goal commitments of minority students. And what do we mean by that? Well, the fact is that while these perceptions of discrimination and prejudice were there, that it didn't affect the importance that the students felt on the completion of a college degree for them, and to the extent to which the completion of the degree of studies itself is very important. So even though they were negative, students were really committed to the goals that they started out with. Moving on now to the next one is the impact on what we call the institutional commitment. And here we found that these perceptions were found to negatively influence the student's commitment to the institution. We mean that these negative discriminatory perceptions reduce the student's desire to earn a degree from that particular institution and did not feel much loyalty to that college as well. Now remember, the one before was on goal. It did not impact their goals, their desire to earn that degree, but it did impact in terms of how loyal they were to that institution and whether in fact they still wanted to consider earning the degree from that institution they were enrolled in. All right, and then Finally, which was our final outcome, we were looking at what kind of an impact did those perceptions have on persistence. And again, this was another surprise. Here we found that perceptions of prejudice were found to only indirectly affect minority students' decisions to re-enroll in college. Now, and I've highlighted this in terms of, while perceptions of discriminatory behaviors and gestures negatively influence the other cognitive and adjustment factors in the model, they did not directly push minority students to drop out of college. I want to come back to this one in terms of the two surprises, the impact on persistence and the impact on the goal commitment. And I think it'll make a little bit more sense a little bit later on. So what were our conclusions from the study? One, support was found for the proposition that perceptions of prejudice discrimination negatively affect the adjustment of the minority student to the two realms of the college while damaging the cognitive and affective outcomes associated with college. However, the results also suggest that these perceptions do not have the overwhelming effect that they are presumed to exert on college persistence process among minority students. Now, at this point in time, we were trying to speculate as to, well, why? Because we all felt at the very beginning that the assertions that are all being made is that if in fact these students perceive all of these discriminatory gestures and behaviors on the campus, that in fact it would negatively affect whether they would come back or not. Well, we speculated and we felt, all right, have they been hardened because they've seen it already before? Are they just is there a high degree of resiliency? And so we speculated as to that, and we felt that, we might have touched on it pretty good. The thing is that, and it's strange because now, so many years later, I think we found the answer to what we were looking for in explaining that outcome. In an article or a paper that was published by Amaury Nora and Kanagawa in 2015, mind you, the title is Ventajas, Assets y Conocimientos Knowledge, Leveraging Latino Strengths to Foster Student Success. We examined the asset-based views that currently focus on Latino cultural wealth and experiential ways of knowing that students employ to transcend their socioeconomic circumstances and to excel in education. And the next paragraph, I think, pretty much sums what we really were trying to get at. The Latino student profile that emerged from the study spoke to the extraordinary strengths and drive to succeed, as well as the ability to become transformed from the college experience. But what pushed these students was their ability to resist microaggressions and to serve as personal support systems for their peers, and their remarkable capacity to maneuver themselves both in the world of college and in their personal worlds. I thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Dr. Nora?
I wanted to begin with a statement, Dr. Nora, that we really appreciate your joining us this afternoon and sharing your story, and also sharing this particular piece of research that we found was very appropriate to share with our faculty, given that during this political election campaign, we have been hearing a lot of, negative things about certain groups, and in particular, some of the immigrant students and Mexican American students. And of course, we were concerned as to how that kind of language impacts individuals, and in particular our students. So we felt that your topic was very appropriate for the times, and we thank you for sharing that, with us. I am very pleased to hear that you talked about resilience, and how our students are able to continue to strive towards their goal. There's been a lot of conversation about who has grit, and without question, your research indicates that our students do have that. Yes. But we're also very concerned about, the loyalty towards the institution, um, because we know that the more engaged, the more likely they are to succeed. We just don't want them to pass. We want them to, excel
Right,
to
right.
their maximum. Um, and the last article that you share with us really kind of hits on the core of the Puente framework that we use in our Dreamcatchers program, and that is that, we want to highlight the assets of the student and validate who they are, um,
Exactly.
in order to be able to succeed. And of course, your mentoring message is very appropriate because as one of our scholar mentors, you know that we have been trying to um, really promote collaboration among our faculty and our scholar mentors in terms of training and research. So everything fits in, beautifully. I wanted to get your opinion on how you think we could or should deal with the issue of the news with our students. Do we acknowledge that there is a lot of negative sentiment towards members of our, community in the classroom? Um, and, we do have a counseling component. We
Hmm.
do have our teachers that are counselors working with our language arts folks. And I just wonder what advice you may be able to give us with regards to.
I'm not sure how specific I can get to that, but you sort of touched on two things that we even found in this article. I didn't point them out. And remember, the study included so many other things that also were found to have very positive impacts on student persistence and their performance, their academic achievement. But you touched on some things, the idea of validation, the idea of the support and encouragement that significant others in their lives have. And I think you're right. I think the more that we talk about it in the sense that we're providing these spaces and we're providing this dialogue that can openly discuss it, and we're able to handle it and to say we know that there are differences of viewpoints, we know that there are differences in so many ways, but we acknowledge those and we still accept those. And I think that's the really important piece. Even in terms of the validation and Laura Rendon's own theory of validation, it's what we do in the classroom and in many of our programs that we also offer, intervention programs. It's how do we go ahead and validate that student to let them know that the differences that they bring with them are acceptable, that they're great, that they're good. And I think that that sort of gets a little bit. I'm not sure how specific you wanted me to get, but I think it sort of goes in line with what we've already found in the past.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, I think.
And I just wanted to jump in. I have a quick question. This is Lydia. Um, that I found your point about parental encouragement really interesting, and that it seemed to have a positive impact. And actually, I think you said that it could also even negate some of the um, more negative factors involved in the perceptions of prejudice and discrimination. I wonder, kind of to relate the two pieces of your presentation, I wonder if positive encouragement from mentors has a similar impact on students.
I think it does. Well, on students, you mean?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yes, I think that. I'm sorry. I jumped to the conclusion that I thought you were asking if it meant something in my life, and I go back
Uh,
now saying yes. There were times when I really questioned whether, in fact, what was I doing, and I know that those encouraging words that I received from all of them were really, really instrumental in my looking at my role, within the professoriate and all of that. But I think that yeah, it can definitely make a huge difference in the lives of students as well. I think in that second study, the conocimientos and assets and all of those, it was a qualitative study, and we were able to sort of discern certain themes that came out of it, and that was one of the profiles that we spoke of. But a lot of it had to do with our students who felt and said that specific words of encouragement and support from those that they felt were significant in their lives made a huge a world of difference in what they did and how they looked at their own lives and their struggle while they were going through college.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Diane Lerma from Palo Alto College has a question she wants to ask. Go ahead, Diane. Diane?
Lydia, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, very well. Thank you. Yes, our question, I'm here with Dr. Rodriguez, and our question is, what do we advise the students as they move from Palo Alto College, which is the majority Hispanic, to a university that maybe the majority have Anglo students?
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of the question. I lost it where you said, what do we, and then I didn't hear the rest.
What do we advise our students that are predominantly Latino here at Palo Alto College? How do we advise them as they transfer to universities that are predominantly Anglo?
How do we advise them? Um,
What advice do we give
I'm not,
them? What advice do we give them to prepare them for a different campus climate?
oh God. Uh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in terms of specific advice. I think if they leave there knowing that they are successful, and have been successful in this academic venture, and they're about to transfer to another place, that just the strengths that they take with them will carry them through, and to look then for spaces in and people there on the campus where they're going that will accept them, and will encourage them and will provide all of the type of validation that they're going to need. I really feel that at some of these larger institutions now that you will be able to find different programs, different interventions, different centers, organizations, whatever you might want, that will be able to provide that. I see more and more where you have transfer centers that are wanting to go ahead and take all of the research and all our findings and to provide, something like Puente does, and so that would be my advice, other than, specifically saying something, I'm not really sure.
Thank you, Dr. Nora.
Okay.
Okay, and Alejandra at Austin Community College has a question for you as well. Go ahead, Alejandra. If not, I can go ahead and pose her question. She says, I have seen Latinos versus Latinos. Some students are more assimilated in the American culture, and others express their identity on their clothes or music, etc. How do we approach that kind of discrimination? What kind of advice can you provide to address that situation?
Wow. I don't know. Honestly, I would hate to speculate. I don't know. I know that when we look at those type of microaggressions, when we look at those type of attitudes, that they have a negative impact on our students. Uh, as far as how do you handle it from one Latino to another because of differences in maybe the ways that they're, or the places that they came from, I am not really sure. I don't want to just sort of speculate and, not based on some evidence that I might have found. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I've seen it though. I mean, I'm not trying to avoid it. I've seen that. I've seen those that, do express their identity very, very differently. But as to how to handle that clash, if you want to call it that, I'm not really sure.
And I mean, I'm just also, I've from a literature background, I go back to the literature and I'm thinking of something like Americo Paredes's George Washington Gomez, where there are these, different class orientations and different generations of, citizenship or different generations of immigrants and things like that, in Jonesville on the Grande, right, where the fictionalization of Brownsville, where he grew up, and
Mhm.
I think even to just incorporating literature like that is addressing those questions. Or he has another short story called The Hamon and the Beans that also addresses those kinds of questions of where, you know, it's all a community, but yet there are still these some discrimination. It could be based on class, it could be based on, you know, immigrant status or citizenship status and things like that. But I think the fact that, you know, there are authors in our communities who are tackling those issues head on, and then it just kind of lays the groundwork for a discussion and how to kind of moderate that discussion, and, you know, manage the classroom and still validate all the students' experiences becomes the challenge.
Right, and I
Um,
think you're right. I think the idea is if you have faculty that value the different perspectives, and that in
mhm.
fact whether you know you express one form versus a different one, but the instructor or the professor there is saying both are just as valid, I think that'll go a long way.
Yeah, that's right. I'm
Mhm.
going to turn it over now to Orlando Lara, who comes to us from Lee College. Orlando, you are unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes.
can.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Nora, for your presentation.
Mhm.
Um, I'm wondering, I don't know if uh, it's probably a hard question, but I know I have heard some critique of the idea of grit and resilience in the sense that it leads us to kind of focus on how students can kind of build their grit resilience, uh, but not so much how the institutions can change. And I'm just wondering what sort of have you ever heard responses from like how administrators have taken this research? Have they said, "Oh, okay, then maybe we don't need to work on changing this climate if they're doing okay," or do they say, "Oh, it's important. They're losing loyalty. We need to change"?
I think it depends on the administrator and the university. I think some are much more open to it, and they do they do look at it. I know that Dr. Rendon and I were involved in three what we called workshops, you know, for our student affairs here at this university, and faculty who also were able and were invited and came in. And I think that there they took the, you know, what we found and really tried to find ways in terms of how to take that research into practice, both in terms of in the classroom as well as in some of the programs that were being made available. But as far as resilience and, you know, and that point, you're right. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that wraps it up for our questions. Thank you so much again, Dr. Nora. It was really great. We
Okay.
really appreciate your presentation and you taking the time for us.
Okay. Thank you.